Lorie Mayfield's hands shook as she faced the man who'd stolen everything. The courthouse ink was still wet on the papers that made her father's land his. She'd ridden through the scorching dust to his ranch, prepared to beg to fight to do whatever it took. But when she finally choked out the words, "Please don't take my home," Thatcher Boone didn't laugh or dismiss her. He studied her with those cold gray eyes and said something that stopped her heart. "Then, you must be my wife. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories of survival, unexpected love, and second chances, please subscribe to our channel. Stay with us until the end to see how Lorie's desperate plea changes 2 lives forever, and comment below with the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel." The morning her world ended, Lorie Mayfield burned the last of her coffee grounds trying to pretend everything was fine. She wasn't fine. Her hands shook as she poured the weak, bitter liquid into her father's chipped mug, the one with his initials scratched into the clay. Thomas Mayfield, dead 6 months now, and the well had gone dry 3 weeks after they'd buried him, like the land itself was mourning. "You always said God provides, Papa." Lorie's voice cracked in the empty cabin. "So where the hell is he now?" The courthouse letter sat on the table edges, curled from her sweaty grip. She'd read it so many times the words had burned into her skull. Notice of land vacancy. Annexation proceedings finalized. New title holder, Boone Ranch Enterprises. 8 days. They'd given her 8 days to pack up 22 years of life and disappear. Lorie grabbed her father's wooden box from the shelf, the one where he'd kept every deed, every receipt, every scrap of proof that this land belonged to them. Her fingers fumbled with the latch. "Come on, damn you." The box opened. Papers spilled across the table. Her grandfather's land grant from 1847, edges yellowed, but text clear. Her father's bank agreement. Tax receipts stamped "paid in full," going back 15 years. And there at the bottom, her father's letter, 3 months old, written in his careful hand when the fever was already eating him alive. "This land passes to my daughter, Lorie Elizabeth Mayfield. She is sole heir. I charge any man of honor to see she is not dispossessed." Lorie's throat closed. "I tried, Papa. God, I tried." She'd gone to Judge Cartwright's office last week with these same papers clutched to her chest like a shield. The judge hadn't even looked up from his desk. "The law is clear, Miss Mayfield. Abandoned property reverts to the county." "It's not abandoned." Her voice had shaken so hard she'd barely recognized it. "I'm standing right here. I've been working this land every single day. Working it into dust." Cartwright had finally met her eyes, his gaze flat and cold. "No crops, no livestock, no improvements. The bank says you haven't made a payment in 6 months. Because there's been no rain? The well went dry, the creek's half dead. I've been hauling water 2 miles every morning just to keep my horse alive." None of that is the court's concern. He'd pushed papers across his desk with 2 fingers like her desperation might be contagious. "The Boone Ranch has purchased the adjoining properties. The transaction is finalized. You have 2 weeks to vacate." She'd wanted to flip his desk, set his courthouse on fire. Instead, she'd gathered her father's papers and walked out with whatever was left of her pride. That was 6 days ago. Now standing in her father's kitchen with cold coffee and colder prospects, Lorie made a decision that would either save her or destroy her. She was going to the man himself, Thatcher Boone. "Stupid," she muttered, shoving the papers into a leather satchel. "Stupid, desperate, pointless." But she strapped on her riding boots anyway, pulled her dark hair into a braid that her shaking fingers barely managed, grabbed her father's canteen even though it was nearly empty. Outside, her mare waited in the small corral. Duchess, 16 years old, chestnut coat dulled by dust and poor feed, but eyes still bright with patience. Her father had bought this horse for her 16th birthday, back when birthdays meant something besides surviving another year. "We're riding to the Boone Ranch." Lorie threw the saddle over Duchess's back hands, moving through familiar motions. I don't know what I'm going to say when we get there, but I have to try. Duchess's ears flicked forward. Ready. Lorie mounted and turned east toward the vast stretch of land that marked Boone territory. She'd seen Thatcher Boone exactly twice in her life. Once at her father's funeral, standing at the back in a black coat, saying nothing, leaving before the last prayer ended. Once in town 3 years ago when he'd walked past her on the boardwalk and tipped his hat without smiling. Both times she'd noticed the same things: tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 35. Gray eyes that looked through people instead of at them. A man who'd forgotten how to be anything except alone. The ride took an hour. With each mile, the land transformed. Her father's burned fields gave way to Boone property green pastures, grazing cattle, windmills turning lazy circles. Water. He had water everywhere. Lorie's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. The Boone Ranch rose from the prairie like a monument to everything she'd lost. 2-story stone house, wrap-around porches, enough outbuildings to house a small town. She counted 20 horses in the corrals. A dozen ranch hands working. More wealth in one glance than her family had seen in 3 generations. She dismounted at the main gate, legs unsteady. A young ranch hand approached, eyeing her worn dress and dust-caked boots. "Help you, miss?" "I need to speak with Mr. Boone." The hand looked doubtful. "He's working the north pasture. Won't be back till—" "Then I'll wait." She tied Duchess to the fence rail and sat on the bottom board, satchel clutched in her lap. "However long it takes." The sun climbed. Noon came and went. Lorie's lips cracked. Her head pounded. She had no water left, no food, nothing but stubborn will keeping her upright. Ranch hands passed. Some stared. Most ignored her. One older man with silver hair finally stopped offering his canteen. "You sure about this, Miss Boss? Don't take kindly to unexpected visitors." Lorie drank carefully, forcing herself not to gulp. "I don't take kindly to thieves, but here we are." The man's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Name's Dutch. I run the stables. You need anything, you holler." "Thank you." It was near 3 o'clock when she heard hoofbeats. 6 riders appeared from the north, dust rising behind them. The man in front rode a black gelding that moved like barely controlled thunder. Even from a distance, she knew him. Thatcher Boone sat his horse like he'd been born there, straight-backed, still face shadowed by his hat. As he approached the gate, his gaze locked on hers, with an intensity that made her breath catch. He didn't speak, just dismounted with smooth efficiency and handed his reins to Dutch. "Got a visitor, boss," Dutch said quietly. "I see that." Boone's voice was low, rough-edged like sandpaper on wood. He walked toward her. Up close, he was harder than she remembered. Weathered skin, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, winter sky eyes with no warmth in them. No mercy either. "Miss Mayfield." He knew her name. "What brings you to my property?" "Your property." The words tasted like poison. "That's what I'm here to discuss. If this is about the land purchase, talk to Judge Cartwright. The transaction is legal and binding." "Legal." Lorie stood, her legs shaking, but her voice steady. "You bought land that wasn't for sale. You used a corrupt judge to steal from a woman who couldn't fight back. That's not legal, Mr. Boone. That's robbery." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. Strong words. True words. She yanked out her father's papers and shoved them toward him. "This land has been in my family for 30 years. I have the deeds. I have the receipts. I have my father's will leaving everything to me. What do you have? A signature from a judge who takes bribes." Boone took the documents. He read slowly, carefully, while the sun beat down and sweat trickled between Lorie's shoulder blades. When he finished, he folded the papers and handed them back. "These don't change anything." Lorie's vision blurred. "How can you—" "Water rights." He cut her off, voice flat. Your property sits on a natural spring. I need that water to expand my northern herd. It's not personal, Miss Mayfield. It's business. It's my home. The words ripped out of her raw and desperate. She hated how she sounded like a beggar, like someone broken, but she had nothing left except truth. It's the only thing I have left. The place where my mother sang to me, where my father taught me to ride, where every memory I have lives in the walls and the land and the... Her voice cracked. She stopped pressing her lips together hard enough to taste blood. Boone watched her. Those gray eyes gave nothing away. No sympathy. No regret. Nothing human. She'd lost. The knowledge hit her like a fist to the stomach. He would take her land, and she would lose everything, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it. Then he spoke. Then you must be my wife. Lorie stared at him. The words made no sense. What? You want to keep your land? I need the water rights. He said it calmly, like discussing cattle prices. Marriage solves both problems. You become Mrs. Thatcher Boone. Your property legally merges with mine, but you retain stewardship rights. You live there, work there, keep your father's legacy. In exchange, I get legal access to the spring. You're insane. I'm practical. He tilted his head slightly, studying her, like she was a horse he was considering buying. You have no money, no resources, no way to fight the court ruling. In 8 days, you'll be homeless. This gives you security. A legal claim no judge can touch. Lorie's heart hammered against her ribs. And what do you get besides water? A wife on paper, nothing more. His voice was flat, empty of emotion. I'm not asking for a real marriage, Miss Mayfield. I'm offering a business arrangement, a contract. You keep your independence. I keep my distance. We both get what we need. Why? Her voice shook. Why would you offer this? Boone was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were careful, measured. Your father was a good man. He never asked for help, but he didn't deserve what happened to him. You don't deserve to lose your home, because the weather turned and the judge is crooked. He paused. And I respect someone who rides 40 miles to fight for what's theirs. It wasn't kindness. She heard that clearly. It was something colder, respect maybe, for her refusal to break. It should have insulted her. Instead, it steadied her. This man wouldn't lie about what this was. No false promises, no pretended affection. Just brutal honesty. If I agree, Lorie said slowly, what exactly would this contract include? You keep your property. Your name goes on the deed as steward. I'll send men to make necessary repairs, roof well fences. You run your land as you see fit. In exchange, I have access to the spring for my cattle. And the marriage itself? On paper only. His eyes held hers. I'm not looking for a wife, Miss Mayfield. I'm looking for a solution. You'll keep your house. I'll keep mine. We'll see each other at town functions if necessary, but otherwise our lives remain separate. How long? Indefinitely, unless you choose to leave. Then the property reverts to the ranch. Your choice. Lorie looked down at her hands, calloused from work, scarred from barbed wire, shaking slightly. Her father's ring still sat on her right hand, the simple gold band he'd worn until fever took him. What would you do, Papa? But she knew. Her father had been a fighter. He would have told her to do whatever it took to survive. I want it in writing, she said. Every detail, signed and witnessed. Agreed. Boone gestured toward the house. Dutch can witness. We'll draw up the contract, now sign it today. Courthouse is open until 5. We can file the marriage license before close of business. Today. Unless you need time to reconsider. She almost said yes. Almost asked for a day a week, anything to slow this runaway horse. But time was the one thing she didn't have. No. Lorie lifted her chin. Let's do this. Boone nodded once and turned toward the house. She followed her mind, screaming that this was wrong, impossible, insane. But her heart whispered that this was survival. This was the only path left. Inside the house was cool and sparse. Hardwood floors, simple furniture, everything clean but lifeless. No photographs, no decorations, nothing that suggested a man actually lived here. Dutch brought paper, ink, and a pen. Boone sat at the dining table and began writing in clear, precise script. "Miss Mayfield." His voice pulled her from the window, where she'd been staring at nothing. "I need your input." She sat across from him, forcing herself to focus as he read, "Marriage agreement between Thatcher James Boone and Lorie Elizabeth Mayfield, entered this 7th day of September, 1876. Article 1, Property Rights. The Mayfield property shall remain under the stewardship of Lorie Elizabeth Mayfield Boone. Said property shall not be sold, mortgaged, or otherwise encumbered without her express written consent. Article 2, Water Access. Thatcher James Boone shall have unlimited access to the natural spring for livestock and agricultural purposes. Article 3, Property Improvements. Thatcher James Boone agrees to fund necessary repairs to structures on the Mayfield property. Article 4, Living Arrangements. Lorie Elizabeth Mayfield Boone shall maintain primary residence in the Mayfield homestead. Thatcher James Boone shall maintain primary residence at the Boone Ranch. Both parties shall maintain separate households. Article 5, Dissolution. Should Lorie Elizabeth Mayfield Boone choose to terminate this arrangement, she shall provide 60 days written notice. Upon dissolution, the Mayfield property shall revert to Boone Ranch ownership, and Lorie Elizabeth Mayfield shall receive a cash settlement of $2,000. He looked up. Acceptable. Lorie read through it again. Cold. Transactional. Everything marriage shouldn't be, and yet it gave her exactly what she needed. Add one more article, she said. Boone raised an eyebrow. Which is Article 6, Personal Boundaries. This is a legal arrangement only. Neither party shall expect or demand marital intimacy. Both parties shall maintain respectful distance and mutual independence. Something almost like amusement crossed his face. Agreed. He wrote it down, then signed at the bottom, Thatcher James Boone. He passed the pen to her. Lorie hesitated only a second before signing Lorie Elizabeth Mayfield. Not Boone yet. Not until a judge made it real. Dutch signed as witness, his expression carefully neutral. Congratulations, I think. Don't, Lorie said. No, ma'am. Boone stood. We need to leave now. Can you ride? I've been riding since dawn. Then let's finish this. The ride to town was silent. Boone led Lorie, followed, dust rising between them like a wall. The courthouse steps were the same ones she'd climbed last week, defeated and hollow. Today she climbed them beside Thatcher Boone and clerks who'd ignored her before suddenly noticed. Judge Cartwright appeared in his office doorway, face going pale. Mr. Boone, I didn't expect... We need a marriage license filed. Today. Boone's voice was flat, brooking no argument. Cartwright's eyes darted between them. A marriage, but the property is resolved. Miss Mayfield and I are entering a legal marriage. I assume you have no objections? The judge's face worked. Of course not. This is unexpected, but perfectly legal. I'll prepare the documents immediately. They stood before his desk as he filled out forms with shaking hands. Lorie watched him, sweat, watched him stumble over words, and felt cold satisfaction. Sign here, Cartwright said, pushing the papers forward. Both of you. Lorie signed first. Her hand was steady now. Boone signed second. The judge added his seal with a heavy thump. By the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The words sounded sour in his mouth. File the deed transfer, Boone said. The Mayfield property is now under joint ownership. Mrs. Boone is listed as primary steward. Yes, immediately. See that you do. Boone took the marriage certificate and tucked it into his coat. Then he turned to Lorie. "It's done." She nodded, throat too tight for words. Outside, the sun had set. Boone untied his horse, then paused. "I'll have men at your property tomorrow to start repairs. If you need anything, send word through Dutch." "I won't need anything." Her voice came out harder than intended. "That was the agreement." "Yes." He studied her for a moment, expression unreadable. "It was. Good night, Mrs. Boone." The name hit her like a slap. Mrs. Boone. Not Mayfield anymore. "Good night." She mounted Duchess and rode away without looking back. When she reached her cabin, everything looked exactly the same. Sagging roof, tilted fence, her mother's rocking chair on the porch. Nothing had changed, and everything had changed. Lorie dismounted, unsaddled Duchess, and sat on the porch steps. She looked at her left hand bare because she'd signed a contract, not accepted a ring. Mrs. Thatcher Boone, a wife without a wedding, a marriage without love. "I did it, Papa," she whispered. "I kept your land. I don't know if you'd be proud or ashamed, but I survived." She sat until the cold drove her inside. Then she lit a candle and opened her father's box one more time. At the bottom lay her mother's journal. She opened it carefully. June 12th, 1854. "Married Thomas Mayfield today. I chose him not because he had wealth or status, but because he looked at me like I mattered. Like my thoughts and dreams were as real as his own. Whatever comes, drought, hardship, struggle, I will always have chosen this man and this life freely." Lorie's eyes burned. Her mother had chosen freely. She'd chosen out of desperation. But they'd both chosen survival. She closed the journal, blew out the candle, and lay down in her father's bed. Sleep came slowly, and when Lorie woke the next morning to the sound of hammers on her roof, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: Thatcher Boone kept his word. The question was whether that would be enough. The hammering started at dawn. Lorie jerked awake, heart-pounding, disoriented by the noise. For a moment she thought it was her father. Thought she'd dreamed the last 6 months, the fever, the funeral, the desperate ride to the Boone ranch. Then reality crashed back, and she remembered. She was married now. The thought felt wrong in her mouth, like a word in a language she didn't speak. She threw off the blanket and stumbled to the window. 4 men worked on her roof, moving with efficient precision. A wagon sat in the yard loaded with lumber, shingles, tools. Near the corral, 2 more men examined her well, measuring the depth with a rope. Dutch stood by the wagon, supervising. When he saw her in the window, he tipped his hat. Lorie dressed quickly, braided her hair, and walked outside. The morning air was cool, but the sun promised another scorching day. "Ma'am?" Dutch approached, his weathered face carefully neutral. "Boss sent us to start on the repairs. We'll do our best not to disturb you." "I've been disturbed since yesterday." The words came out sharper than intended. "But I appreciate the work." "Yes, ma'am." He gestured toward the well. "We're thinking we need to dig deeper. Hit a new water table. Should take about 3 days." 3 days. Her throat tightened at the thought of actual water again. Running water. Enough to bathe, to wash clothes, to not ration every single drop like liquid gold. "That would be... thank you." Dutch nodded and returned to the men. Lorie stood in her yard watching strangers fix her home and felt something complicated twist in her chest. Gratitude, yes, but also resentment. She'd been doing this alone for months, breaking her back, trying to keep everything from falling apart. And now Thatcher Boone sent 6 men and a wagon full of supplies, and in 3 days her well would work again. Because she'd signed a contract. Because she'd given up her name. "Stop it," she muttered to herself. "You made your choice. Live with it." She fed Duchess, then walked to her small garden plot. The vegetables were struggling half-dead tomato plants, withered beans, a few scraggly carrots. She'd been hauling water from the creek 2 miles away, carrying it bucket by bucket trying to save something. Anything. But now with a working well. Lorie knelt in the dirt and began pulling weeds, her hands moving through familiar motions. Work had always been her salvation. When her mother died, she'd worked. When her father got sick, she'd worked. When he died and left her alone, she'd worked until her hands bled and her body collapsed from exhaustion. Work was honest. Work made sense. Work didn't ask questions she couldn't answer. The sun climbed higher. The hammering continued steady and rhythmic. Around noon, Dutch brought her a canteen of water and a wrapped bundle. "Boss said you might be hungry." Inside the cloth, fresh bread, cheese, dried apples. Lorie's stomach cramped with sudden, desperate hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. "Thank you." She ate slowly, forcing herself not to gulp it down like an animal. "Tell Mr. Boone I appreciate his consideration." "You can tell him yourself. He's coming by this afternoon to check the progress." Her hands froze mid-reach for another piece of bread. "He's coming here?" "Yes, ma'am. Around 3 o'clock, he said." Dutch walked away, leaving Lorie staring at the bread in her hands. Thatcher Boone was coming here. To her home. The man she'd married yesterday was going to walk onto her property like he had every right to, which he did now. Legally. That was the agreement. Lorie stood abruptly, brushing crumbs from her dress. She looked down at herself, work dress stained with dirt and sweat boots caked with mud hair, escaping her braid in wild strands. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman barely surviving. "I don't care what he thinks," she said aloud. But her hands were already moving, smoothing her dress, tucking loose hair behind her ears. She spent the next 2 hours working in the garden, hyper-aware of every passing minute. At exactly 3 o'clock, she heard hoofbeats. Thatcher Boone rode into her yard on that black gelding, looking as calm and controlled as he had yesterday. He dismounted with easy grace and surveyed the work with a critical eye. Lorie stood wiping dirt from her hands, her heart hammered against her ribs. "Mr. Boone? Mrs. Boone!" His gray eyes settled on her, and she felt that same intensity from yesterday, like he was seeing straight through her skin to the bones beneath. "How's the work progressing?" "I have no complaints." "That's not what I asked." She blinked. "The roof should be finished by tomorrow. The well will take 3 days. Your men are efficient and respectful." "Good." He walked toward the well, examining the depth they'd already reached. Dutch joined him, explaining something about water tables and limestone. Boone listened, asked questions, nodded. Lorie watched him move through her yard, this stranger who was now her husband. He touched nothing that wasn't work-related, didn't approach her cabin, kept a careful distance from her personal space, honoring the contract she realized, maintaining boundaries. It should have relieved her. Instead, it felt oddly cold. When Boone finished with Dutch, he walked back toward his horse. Then he paused, looking at her garden. "You're trying to grow vegetables." "I was." She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "Until the drought killed everything. With a working well, you could expand this, double the plot size, grow enough to sell at the market in town." Lorie stared at him. "Are you suggesting I become a vegetable farmer?" "I'm suggesting you use the resources available." His voice was matter-of-fact. "You're a hard worker, Mrs. Boone. No reason that work can't produce income. I don't need your charity." "It's not charity, it's practical advice." He swung into his saddle with fluid ease. "The agreement gives you stewardship of this land. What you do with it is your decision. But if you're going to work yourself to exhaustion anyway, you might as well profit from it." Before she could respond, he turned his horse and rode away. Lorie stood in her yard, hands clenched into fists, feeling something hot and complicated burn in her chest. He'd insulted her and given her good advice in the same breath. Maintained boundaries and showed interest in her welfare. Kept his distance and somehow made her feel seen. She didn't know whether to be grateful or furious. "Both," she muttered. "I'm both." That night, lying in her father's bed, Lorie stared at the ceiling and listened to the silence. No hammering now, no voices, just wind through the eaves and coyotes calling in the distance. She thought about Thatcher Boone's words. You might as well profit from it. She thought about the working well that would be ready in 3 days. She thought about her mother's journal entry, the one about choosing freely. Had she chosen freely? Or had she been backed into a corner with no other options? Does it matter? She whispered to the darkness. Either way, I survived. But survival wasn't the same as living. She was beginning to understand that. The next 3 days passed in a blur of hammering, digging, and gradual transformation. The roof was finished solid and watertight for the first time in 2 years. The fence posts were repaired and reinforced. The barn door that had hung crooked since her father's death now swung smooth and true. And on the 3rd day, the well came alive. Lorie heard the shout from inside her cabin. She ran outside to find Dutch and his men gathered around the well, grinning like fools. "We hit it, ma'am," Dutch called. "Good clean water, strong flow too." Lorie approached slowly, afraid to hope. Dutch cranked the handle, and water, clear, cold, beautiful water, poured into the bucket. He lifted it out and offered it to her. "First, draw belongs to you." She took the bucket with shaking hands and drank. The water was cold enough to make her teeth ache, sweet enough to make her throat close with relief. She drank until she had to stop for breath, then drank again. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Dutch smiled. "Thank the boss, ma'am. He's the one who authorized the work." "Right. Thatcher Boone. The man who'd bought her land and then married her to let her keep it. The man who'd sent workers and supplies and asked for nothing in return except access to her spring. Except that wasn't quite true, was it? He'd asked her to be his wife. On paper, only yes. But still, she wore his name now. That afternoon, after the workers had packed up and left, Lorie stood in her yard and looked at everything that had changed in just 4 days. Solid roof. Working well. Repaired fences. The physical transformation was obvious. But something inside her had shifted too. Some small, stubborn part of her that had been clenched tight with fear and pride was beginning to loosen. She didn't owe Thatcher Boone gratitude, this was part of their agreement. But she felt it anyway. The question was what to do about it. 2 days later, Lorie rode to town. She needed supplies, seeds for the expanded garden. Boone had suggested tools, a few yards of fabric to patch her worn dresses. She had almost no money, but Dutch had quietly left an envelope on her porch yesterday with a note, "Household allowance. Boss's orders." Inside $50. More money than she'd seen in 6 months. Lorie had stared at that envelope for 20 minutes, pride warring with practicality. Pride lost. She took the money. Now, riding Duchess down the main street of town, she felt eyes on her from every direction. Word had spread fast. Lorie Mayfield, poor desperate Lorie, had married Thatcher Boone. The richest rancher in 3 counties had married a woman with nothing. People were talking. Of course they were talking. She tied Duchess outside the general store and walked inside, spine straight, chin up. Let them stare. Let them whisper. She was still here. "Well, well." The store owner, Mr. Hewitt, looked up from his counter with raised eyebrows. "Mrs. Boone, this is unexpected. I need supplies." She handed him a list she'd written that morning. Hewitt read it slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to calculation. "This is quite an order. You planning on expanding your operation?" "My husband suggested it." The words felt strange in her mouth. "My husband." "I see." Hewitt's tone changed, became more respectful. "Of course. I can have this ready by tomorrow. Should I send it to the Mayfield property or the Boone Ranch?" "The Mayfield property. That's where I live." Something flickered in his eyes, curiosity maybe, or confusion, but he just nodded. "Very well, Mrs. Boone. Will there be anything else?" "No, thank you." She turned to leave and nearly collided with a woman entering the store. Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife. A woman who'd walked past Lorie on the street last month without acknowledgement. "Oh, Mrs. Boone." Mrs. Patterson's voice was suddenly warm, suddenly interested. "What a surprise I heard about your marriage, such wonderful news. You must come to tea this Thursday. I'm having several ladies over, and I'm sure they'd love to hear all about—" "No, thank you." Lorie stepped around her. "I'm very busy." "But surely you can spare an hour." I said no. She walked out of the store and mounted Dutch's hands shaking with anger. They hadn't cared about her when she was drowning. But now that she wore the Boone name suddenly, she was worth their attention. "Vultures," she muttered, turning Duchess toward home. She was halfway out of town when she heard another horse approaching fast. She turned hand instinctively, going to the knife at her belt. Thatcher Boone pulled up beside her, his black gelding breathing hard. "Mrs. Boone." "Mr. Boone." Her voice was tight. "Is there a problem?" "Dutch said you rode to town alone." "I'm perfectly capable of riding to town." "I didn't say you weren't." He studied her face and she realized with shock that he looked concerned. Actually concerned. "But people talk. And not everyone in town is kind." I noticed. She relaxed her grip on the knife. "Mrs. Patterson just invited me to tea. 6 months ago she crossed the street to avoid me." Something hard flashed in Boone's eyes. "Did she?" "It's fine," I refused. "Good." He turned his horse to ride alongside her. "You don't owe those people anything. Not your time, not your company, not your story." They rode in silence for a while. Lorie was acutely aware of him beside her, the solid presence of him, the quiet strength. It should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt oddly safe. "Why did you follow me?" she asked finally. "I was heading this direction anyway, checking fence lines on the eastern property." That's not an answer. He was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't respond. Then, "I wanted to make sure you were all right." The words hit her harder than they should have. When was the last time anyone had cared if she was all right? Her father, maybe. Before the fever took his mind along with his strength. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice cracked on the word. Boone didn't comment on it, just rode beside her in comfortable silence until they reached the fork in the road, one path leading to her property, the other to the main ranch. He reined in his horse. "The workers finished yesterday, but if you need anything else, repairs, supplies, anything, send word through Dutch." "I won't need anything." The automatic response. The proud response. "Maybe not." His gray eyes held hers. "But the offer stands." He tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Lorie alone at the crossroads. That night, she dreamed about her father. He was sitting in his rocking chair on the porch, pipe in hand, looking out at the sunset like he used to do every evening. "You did good, Lorie girl," he said without looking at her. "You survived." "But at what cost?" she heard herself ask. "The cost don't matter if you're still standing." She woke with tears on her face and her father's words echoing in her skull. The following week passed in hard work and strange adjustment. Lorie expanded her garden, planting seeds with dirt under her fingernails and hope in her chest. The well ran strong and clear. Her vegetables began to recover green shoots pushing through the soil like small miracles. She saw Thatcher Boone 3 more times that week. Once when he rode past her property checking his fence lines. He'd waved, but didn't stop. Once in town where he'd nodded to her across the street but maintained distance. Once when he'd brought Dutch to examine the spring and ensure the cattle had proper access. Each time he was polite, respectful, distant. Each time something in Lorie's chest twisted with an emotion she couldn't name. On the 8th day after their marriage, a storm rolled in from the west. Not the gentle rain they desperately needed, but a violent thrashing storm that turned the sky black and split the world with lightning. Lorie secured Duchess in the barn, then ran for the cabin as wind tore at her hair and clothes. She made it inside just as the first drops hit fat and heavy. Then the sky opened. Rain hammered the roof, her new solid watertight roof, and Lorie stood in her father's kitchen listening to the most beautiful sound she'd heard in months. Rain. Actual rain. She started laughing, couldn't help it. Stood there laughing and crying at the same time, relief and joy, and something wild flooding through her. The storm lasted 2 hours. When it finally passed, Lorie walked outside into the cool, wet evening. Everything smelled like rain and earth and possibility. Her garden was soaked, the dry ground finally drinking. And there near her fence line she saw him. Thatcher Boone sat on his horse in the fading light, watching the rain drain across her fields toward the spring. He was soaked through, hat pulled low, shoulders hunched against the wind. But he hadn't taken shelter. He'd stayed to make sure the runoff didn't damage her property, she realized. To make sure everything held. He turned and saw her watching. For a long moment, they just looked at each other across the wet grass. Then he tipped his hat and rode away. Lorie stood there long after he'd disappeared, water dripping from her hair and her heart beating too fast. Something was shifting between them. Something she didn't understand and wasn't sure she wanted. But for the first time since her father died, she felt like she wasn't completely alone. And that terrified her more than anything else. The rain changed everything. Within a week, Lorie's garden exploded with green. Tomato plants that had been half dead now reached toward the sky. Beans climbed their poles with desperate enthusiasm. Even the sad little carrots perked up their feathery tops, bright and healthy. She worked from dawn until dusk, weeding and watering and coaxing life from soil that had spent months trying to kill everything she planted. Her back ached, her hands were raw, and she'd never been happier. On the 9th morning after the storm, she loaded a wagon with vegetables, the first real harvest she'd had in over a year. Tomatoes, beans, squash, even some early lettuce. Not much, but enough to sell at the Saturday market in town. Dutch appeared while she was hitching Duchess to the wagon. "Need help with that, ma'am?" "I've got it." She secured the last strap and wiped sweat from her forehead. "But thank you." "Boss wanted me to check if you needed anything." Lorie paused, hands stilling on the harness. "Mr. Boone sent you to check on me. Sends me every few days." Dutch's weathered face was carefully neutral. "Says to make sure the repairs are holding the wells still running strong, that sort of thing." "I see." She didn't see it all. Thatcher Boone was monitoring her property through Dutch, making sure everything worked, that she was... What? Safe, comfortable. "Tell him everything's fine." "Yes, ma'am." Dutch hesitated. "You heading to town?" "Market day." "Boss might not like you going alone." Something hot flashed through her chest. "I don't require Mr. Boone's permission to sell my own vegetables." "Didn't say you did." Dutch held up his hands. "Just saying he worries." "He worries?" The words felt foreign. "About me. About his wife." Dutch said it simply, like it was obvious. "Even if it's a business arrangement, you still carry his name. That means something to him." Lorie stared at the older man, trying to process this information. Thatcher Boone worried about her. The man who barely spoke, who kept careful distance, who treated their marriage like a legal document and nothing more. "I'll be careful," she said finally. She drove the wagon to town, every bump in the road, making her precious cargo bounce and shift. When she pulled up to the market square, she found her usual spot already taken by another farmer's stall. "Excuse me," she called to the man. "This is my space." He looked her up and down, eyes cold. "Don't see your name on it." "I've used this spot for 3 years. Used to use it. Before you couldn't afford the fee." He turned his back. "Move along." Lorie's hands tightened on the wagon seat. She could argue, could make a scene. But that would draw attention she didn't want, and she needed to sell these vegetables more than she needed pride. She drove the wagon to a spot near the edge of the market, farther from the main traffic, but at least available. She unloaded her crates and set up her display with shaking hands. Within an hour, she'd sold half her produce. People approached cautiously at first, eyeing her like she might bite. But her vegetables were fresh, and her prices fair, and money talked louder than gossip. Mrs. Boone. A familiar voice cut through the market noise. Lorie turned to find Mrs. Patterson bearing down on her two other women in tow. All of them wore expensive dresses and false smiles. "What a surprise seeing you here. I didn't realize you were selling vegetables." "I'm a farmer, Mrs. Patterson. That's what farmers do." "Oh, of course. How charming." Mrs. Patterson's laugh was shrill. "And here I thought with your marriage to Mr. Boone you wouldn't need to work." The words dripped with condescension. Lorie felt heat rise in her chest. "I've always worked. That hasn't changed. But surely Mr. Boone provides. Mr. Boone and I have an arrangement that works for both of us." Lorie picked up a crate of tomatoes, making it clear the conversation was over. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have customers." She turned away, ignoring Mrs. Patterson's affronted gasp. Let them talk. Let them whisper. She didn't need their approval or their pity. By noon, she'd sold everything except a small basket of tomatoes. She was packing up when she felt someone watching her. She looked up and found Thatcher Boone standing 10 feet away, hat pulled low, arms crossed. Her heart jumped. "What are you doing here?" "Buying supplies." He nodded toward the hardware store across the street. "Saw your wagon. And decided to spy on me. Decided to make sure you were all right." His gray eyes settled on her empty crates. "Sold everything." "Almost." She held up the remaining basket. "Not bad for my first market in months." "Good." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I heard about your spot being taken." Of course he had. Nothing happened in this town without people talking, and apparently word traveled fast when it involved Thatcher Boone's wife. "It's fine. I managed." "It's not fine. Miller had no right." "I said it's fine." She cut him off, frustration bleeding into her voice. "I don't need you to fight my battles, Mr. Boone. I've been doing that myself for a very long time." He was quiet for a moment, studying her. Then, "I know you have. But you don't have to anymore." The words hit her sideways. She opened her mouth to argue, to insist she didn't need anyone, but her throat closed around the protest. Because the truth was, she was tired. Bone-deep, soul-tired of fighting alone. And having someone, even this cold, distant man, offer to stand beside her felt like water in a desert. "I should go," she said instead. "I have work waiting." "Lorie." Her name in his mouth stopped her cold. He'd never used her first name before. "You did good today. Your father would be proud." Then he walked away, leaving her standing in the market square with tears burning behind her eyes. That night she sat on her porch with her mother's journal and a cup of coffee she could finally afford. She opened to a random page and read by lamplight August 3rd, 1855. "Thomas fixed the barn door today. I didn't ask him to. I was planning to do it myself tomorrow. But he saw it hanging crooked and couldn't leave it alone. He has this way of noticing what I need before I ask. It's unsettling and comforting all at once." Lorie closed the journal slowly. Thatcher Boone had sent Dutch to check on her, had followed her to town to make sure she was safe, had noticed when her market spot was taken and offered to defend her. He was noticing what she needed, just like her father had noticed what her mother needed. But this wasn't love. This was duty, obligation, a man honoring his contract. Wasn't it? The next week brought more rain, gentler this time, and her fields responded with enthusiasm. She worked until her muscles screamed, preparing for the next market day. Dutch came by twice, checking the well and the roof, and pretending he wasn't also checking on her. On Wednesday, a rider came from the Boone ranch. Not Dutch, a younger man she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Boone boss sent me with a message." Her heart stuttered. "Is something wrong?" "No, ma'am. He's hosting a dinner Saturday evening. Couple of neighboring ranchers and their wives. He wanted to know if you'd attend." Lorie stared at the young man. A dinner party. At the Boone ranch. where she'd be expected to play the role of Thatcher Boone's wife in front of actual people. "Tell him I'll think about it." "He said to tell you." The writer hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "He said it's not required, just an invitation. If you prefer not to come, he understands." Of course. Because their arrangement was business, not personal. She could refuse without consequence. But something stubborn rose in her chest. These people thought she was weak, thought she'd married for money and security. Let them see her standing beside Thatcher Boone as his equal, not his charity case. "Tell him I'll be there, 6 o'clock." "Yes, ma'am." And he said... The writer pulled an envelope from his pocket. "He said you might want this, for a dress." Inside, $100. Lorie's pride flared hot and immediate. She opened her mouth to refuse to tell this boy to take the money back. Then she looked down at her one good dress, faded, patched, worn thin from years of use. She took the envelope. "Thank you." After the writer left, she sat on her porch steps and counted the money 3 times. $100. For a dress. More money than her father had spent on clothes in 5 years. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. But she rode to town the next morning anyway. The dressmaker, Mrs. Chen, looked up when Lorie entered her shop. Her eyes widened slightly. "Mrs. Boone, this is unexpected. I need a dress for a dinner party, Saturday evening." Lorie placed the envelope on the counter. "Something appropriate for the Boone Ranch." Mrs. Chen's expression shifted from surprise to professional interest. "I see. Do you have a style in mind?" "Something simple. Practical. Nothing too fancy." "May I suggest?" Mrs. Chen pulled out a fashion book. "Something elegant but understated. You want to look like you belong there, not like you're trying too hard." The words stung, but they were true. Lorie nodded. They spent an hour selecting fabric, a deep blue cotton, with subtle detailing, nothing flashy, but well made. Mrs. Chen took her measurements with efficient hands, and Lorie tried not to think about how thin she'd gotten over the past year. "I can have it ready by Friday afternoon," Mrs. Chen said. "Will that work?" "Yes. Thank you." As Lorie turned to leave, Mrs. Chen spoke again. "Mrs. Boone, your mother used to come here, years ago before she passed. She had excellent taste." Lorie's throat tightened. "She did. You look like her. Same eyes." The unexpected kindness nearly undid her. She nodded quickly and left before tears could fall. Friday afternoon she picked up the dress. It fit perfectly elegant without being ostentatious, the blue bringing out the color in her eyes. She barely recognized herself in Mrs. Chen's mirror. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Your mother would be proud." Lorie paid and carried the dress home wrapped in paper, her heart beating too fast. Saturday arrived with brutal inevitability. Lorie spent the morning working in her garden, trying to burn off nervous energy. At 3 o'clock, she forced herself inside to bathe and dress. The blue dress felt foreign on her body. She'd worn work clothes for so long that anything else seemed like a costume. She braided her hair, then unbraided it, then braided it again, hands shaking. "It's just dinner," she told her reflection. "Just one evening. You can do this." At 5:30, she saddled Duchess and rode toward the Boone Ranch. The sun sat low on the horizon, painting everything gold and orange. Beautiful if she'd been able to appreciate it. When she reached the main house, Dutch was waiting. "Evening, ma'am. Boss asked me to show you in." "Is he?" She swallowed hard. "Are the guests here yet?" "2 couples so far. The Hendersons from the North Range and the Coopers from town. One more couple expected any minute." Lorie dismounted, her legs unsteady. Dutch offered his arm. "You look real nice, ma'am. Boss will be pleased." This isn't about pleasing him. "No, ma'am." But Dutch smiled slightly, like he knew something she didn't. He led her up the porch steps and through the front door. Inside, the house had been transformed. Candles burned in holders, casting warm light across the clean floors. The dining table was set with china and crystal that probably cost more than her entire cabin. And standing near the window, talking to an older couple, was Thatcher Boone. He wore a black suit, white shirt, his dark hair combed back. He looked like he belonged in this elegant space, commanding and confident. Then he turned and saw her, and something shifted in his expression. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. Lorie. Her name again, soft and careful. You came. You invited me. I did. I wasn't sure you'd accept. His eyes moved over her face, her dress, then back to her eyes. You look beautiful. The words hit her like a physical thing. When was the last time someone had called her beautiful? Years. Before the drought, before death, before desperation had carved lines into her face. Thank you, she managed. Come meet the Hendersons. He offered his arm, formal and proper. She took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fabric. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and polite conversation. The Hendersons were older, weathered ranchers who treated Lorie with cautious respect. The Coopers were younger, the wife clearly curious, and the husband carefully neutral. The third couple, the Burtons, arrived late and stared at Lorie like she was a puzzle they couldn't solve. Through it all, Thatcher stayed close, not hovering, but present. When Mrs. Cooper asked pointed questions about their courtship, he deflected smoothly. When Mr. Henderson mentioned the drought, Thatcher steered the conversation toward recovery. He protected her without making it obvious, and Lorie felt something warm and dangerous bloom in her chest. At dinner, she found herself seated at Thatcher's right hand. The food was excellent: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bred vegetables from who knew where. She ate carefully, aware of everyone watching. So tell me, Mrs. Boone, Mrs. Burton said sweetly, how are you finding married life? The table went quiet. This was the moment, Lorie realized, the moment they were all waiting for. Would she stumble? Would she admit this marriage was a sham? I'm finding it agreeable, she said calmly. Mr. Boone is a man of his word. That's worth more than most people realize. Something flickered in Thatcher's eyes. He set down his fork carefully. My wife is too kind, he said. The truth is, I'm the one who benefited from this arrangement. She brought intelligent strength and determination. All I brought was land. The words stunned her. He was defending her, elevating her, making it clear to everyone at this table that she was his equal, not his charity project. Mrs. Burton's smile faltered. How romantic. Practical, Thatcher corrected. My wife is extremely practical. It's one of the things I admire most about her. The conversation moved on, but Lorie barely heard it. Her heart was pounding too hard, her mind reeling. He'd called her intelligent, strong, said he admired her. This was still just an arrangement, still just a contract, wasn't it? After dinner, the men retired to the study for brandy and business talk. The women gathered in the sitting room, and Lorie found herself trapped with Mrs. Cooper and Mrs. Burton, while Mrs. Henderson dozed in a chair. I must say, Mrs. Cooper began, her voice honey-sweet. Your marriage was quite surprising. Mr. Boone has been a bachelor for so long we'd all given up hope. Hope for what? Lorie asked. That he'd find someone suitable. Mrs. Burton jumped in. Someone who could manage a ranch this size. Someone with the proper background. The insult was clear. Lorie kept her face neutral. I manage 40 acres just fine. I imagine the principal's scale. Oh, but it's so much more than land management. Mrs. Cooper leaned forward. There are social obligations, entertaining, representing the ranch in town. It's quite demanding for someone who isn't accustomed to it. You mean someone who's poor? Lorie said it flatly, watching their faces flush. You can say it plainly, Mrs. Cooper. I was poor. My father died and left me with nothing but dirt and debt. That's why you all ignored me for months. And now that I married Thatcher Boone, suddenly, I'm interesting again. Mrs. Burton gasped. I never. Yes, you did. Lorie stood smoothing her dress. You all did. But here's what you don't understand. I didn't marry Mr. Boone to escape poverty. I married him to keep my land. to honor my father's legacy. And if that makes me unsuitable in your eyes, I genuinely don't care." She walked out of the sitting room, her heart hammering, hands shaking with adrenaline. She made it to the front porch before her legs gave out. She sank onto the steps, pressing her palms to her eyes. "Stupid," she whispered. "Stupid, stupid, stupid." She'd just insulted half the important women in the county. She'd embarrassed Thatcher in front of his guests. She'd proven exactly what they all thought, that she didn't belong here. Lorie. She jerked her head up. Thatcher stood in the doorway, backlit by candlelight. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I shouldn't have spoken to them like that. I embarrassed you. You didn't embarrass me." He sat beside her on the steps, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "You told them the truth. They deserved it. But they're your neighbors, your business associates. They're gossips who have nothing better to do than judge people they don't understand." He looked at her, and in the twilight, his expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. "I should have warned you, should have prepared you for their questions. It's not your fault I can't play the part." "What part?" "The grateful wife. The woman who married up. Her voice cracked. "Whatever I'm supposed to be." "You're supposed to be yourself." Thatcher's voice was quiet but firm. "That's all I've ever asked." Lorie looked at him. Really looked at him, for the first time since this whole thing began. In the fading light, she saw past the cold exterior, past the practical businessman, to something underneath. Something lonely and careful, and maybe, just maybe, hopeful. "Why did you really marry me?" she whispered. He was quiet for a long moment. "I told you. Water rights. Practical reasons. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have." But his eyes said something different. His eyes said he was lying. "Thatcher, we should go back inside." He stood, offering his hand. "Before they think we've abandoned them completely." She took his hand and let him pull her up. His grip was warm, calloused, strong. He didn't let go immediately. "You did well tonight," he said. "Better than you think." Then he released her hand and walked back inside, leaving her standing on the porch with her heart beating too fast and questions she wasn't ready to answer. The rest of the evening passed in awkward politeness. The guests left early, making excuses about the ride home. Lorie suspected they couldn't wait to start gossiping about the Boones' strange marriage. She gathered her things, preparing to ride home in the dark. Thatcher appeared with a lantern. "I'll ride with you." "That's not necessary." "I know." He was already moving toward the stables. "I'm doing it anyway." They rode in silence through the cool night, the lantern casting dancing shadows across the grass. When they reached her cabin, he dismounted and helped her down, his hands steady on her waist. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight, for defending me." "I wasn't defending you. I was telling the truth." He hesitated then. "You asked why I really married you." Her breath caught. "Yes. The water rights were real. But I could have found other solutions. Other properties." He looked at her, and in the lantern light, his eyes were dark and unreadable. "The truth is, when you rode onto my ranch and refused to break even when you had every reason to, I saw something I recognized. Someone who'd do whatever it took to survive. And I thought, if I'm going to tie my life to someone even on paper, it should be someone with that kind of strength." Lorie's throat closed. "That's still practical." "Maybe." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Or maybe I was tired of being alone." Before she could respond, he swung back into his saddle. "Good night, Lorie." "Good night." She watched him ride away, the lantern light fading into darkness, and felt the careful walls around her heart begin to crack. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, a contract, nothing more. But something was changing between them. Something she didn't know how to name and wasn't sure she wanted. She went inside and lit a candle. Opened her mother's journal to the last entry her mother had ever written, December 18, 1863. "I'm dying. I know this, and Thomas knows this, though neither of us speaks it aloud. What surprises me is not the fear, but the gratitude. I got to love him. I got to build a life with a man who saw me, truly saw me, and chose me anyway. Whatever comes next, I had that. It was enough. Lorie closed the journal with shaking hands. Her mother had been seen, chosen, loved. And tonight, for the first time since her father died, Lorie had felt seen too. Not as a charity case or a business arrangement, but as herself, flawed and stubborn and strong. Thatcher Boone had seen her. The question was, what would happen now? Sleep didn't come that night. Lorie lay in her father's bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Thatcher's words over and over. Maybe I was tired of being alone. The confession had been quiet, almost reluctant, but it had hit her with the force of a lightning strike. He'd been lonely. This powerful, self-sufficient man who needed nothing from anyone had been lonely enough to marry a desperate stranger, just to have someone who understood what survival cost. She understood. God, she understood too well. Dawn broke cold and gray, promising more rain. Lorie dragged herself from bed and went through the morning routine on autopilot. Feed Duchess, check the garden. Haul water, even though the well worked fine now, because her body needed the familiar motion of work to quiet her racing mind. She was pulling weeds when she heard hoofbeats. Her heart jumped before she could stop it, but when she looked up, it was Dutch riding toward her, not Thatcher. Disappointment hit her harder than it should have. "Morning, ma'am." Dutch dismounted, his weathered face concerned. "Boss wanted me to check on you after last night." "I'm fine. Are you—" He studied her with knowing eyes. "Those women at dinner weren't kind." "No, they weren't." Lorie yanked at a stubborn weed, her hands rough in the dirt. "But I survived worse." "Yes, ma'am, you have." Dutch paused. "For what it's worth, Boss was proud of how you handled yourself." Her hands stilled. "He said that—" "Didn't have to. I've worked for Thatcher Boone for 15 years. I know when he's pleased, and last night after the guests left, he was more relaxed than I've seen him in months." Lorie sat back on her heels, processing this. "I insulted his guests and walked out in the middle of dinner. You stood up for yourself. There's a difference." Dutch pulled an envelope from his pocket. "He asked me to give you this." Inside was a brief note in Thatcher's precise handwriting. "The Hendersons asked if we'd visit their ranch next Sunday for dinner. You don't have to go, but they specifically requested your presence. They liked you." Lorie read it twice, her throat tight. The Hendersons had liked her. Not pitied her, not tolerated her. Liked her. "Tell him." She stopped, unsure what she wanted to say. "Tell him I'll think about it." "Yes, ma'am." Dutch tipped his hat and mounted his horse. Then he paused. "Mrs. Boone, boss, don't let people in easy. Never has. But when he does, it's real. Just thought you should know that." He rode away, leaving Lorie kneeling in her garden with dirt under her nails and tears threatening to spill. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended tension. She worked her garden, sold more vegetables at the market, avoided Mrs. Patterson and her ilk. But underneath everything, a question hummed like a plucked wire. What was happening between her and Thatcher Boone? On Wednesday, he came himself instead of sending Dutch. Lorie was in the barn, mucking out Duchess's stall, when she heard his voice. "Need help with that?" She spun around, pitchfork in hand, heart hammering. Thatcher stood in the barn doorway, hat in hand, looking oddly uncertain. "I've been mucking stalls since I was 8 years old. I think I can manage." "I know you can." He stepped inside, and suddenly the barn felt smaller. "I wanted to talk to you about Sunday, the Henderson dinner." "I haven't decided yet." "I know." He leaned against a post, watching her work. "They're good people, Lorie. They don't care about gossip or social standing. They care about honest work and honest character. Like you." The words came out before she could stop them. His eyes met hers. "I try to be." She set down the pitchfork, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Why does it matter to you if I go?" Because, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Because I want people to know you. The real you, not the version Mrs. Patterson and her friends invented. Why? Because you deserve that. His voice was quiet but intense. You deserve to be seen for who you are, not what circumstances made you. The words wrapped around her heart and squeezed. She turned away, pretending to check Duchess's water bucket, because if she looked at him, she might do something stupid like cry, or confess that she was starting to care about this arrangement far more than was safe. I'll go, she said to the water bucket. To the Hendersons. On Sunday. Thank you. She heard him move, felt him close behind her. Lorie, I know this hasn't been easy. This marriage, the gossip, navigating what we are to each other. What are we? She turned to face him. To each other. Thatcher looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something raw and uncertain in his eyes. Something that matched the feeling growing in her own chest. I don't know, he said finally, but I'd like to find out. He left before she could respond, and Lorie stood in the barn shaking, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Sunday arrived too quickly. Lorie wore her blue dress again, the only nice thing she owned, and tried not to be nervous. Thatcher arrived at 4 o'clock to escort her riding beside her wagon, because the Hendersons lived 20 miles north. They talked more easily now. He asked about her garden, her plans for winter planting. She asked about his cattle, the ranch operations. The conversation was simple, practical, but underneath it ran a current of something deeper, something neither of them was quite ready to name. The Henderson ranch was smaller than Boone's spread, but well-maintained and comfortable. Martha Henderson greeted them at the door with genuine warmth. Mrs. Boone, I'm so glad you came. Please come in, come in. Inside the house smelled like roasted chicken and fresh bread. Martha's husband Frank shook Thatcher's hand and nodded respectfully to Lorie. Good to see you again, Mrs. Boone. Martha hasn't stopped talking about you all week. All good things, I hope, Lorie said. Honest things, Martha corrected. I told Frank you were the first woman I'd met in years who didn't put on airs or pretend to be something she wasn't. That's rare. Worth respecting. Lorie's throat tightened. Thank you. Dinner was relaxed, easy. The Hendersons asked genuine questions about Lorie's background, her farming experience, her plans for the future. They didn't pry into her marriage or make assumptions. They just talked to her. Like she was a real person worth knowing. Over coffee, Martha asked, Have you ever considered raising chickens, Mrs. Boone? With that garden of yours, you could sell eggs at market too. I thought about it, Lorie admitted. But I'd need to build a coop first, and I don't have the materials. I've got lumber sitting unused, Frank offered. Left over from expanding our barn last year. You're welcome to it. Lorie blinked. I couldn't. Sure you could, Martha said warmly. That's what neighbors do. We help each other. Neighbors. Not social climbers or gossips or people judging her worth by her husband's bank account. Just neighbors. Thank you, Lorie said and meant it. That's very kind. On the ride home, Thatcher was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet, the kind that didn't need filling. When they reached her cabin, he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. They liked you, he said. I knew they would. They're good people. Yes. He looked at her in the fading light. You smiled tonight, really smiled. I don't think I've seen you do that before. I haven't had much reason to. I know. His hand came up, almost touching her face, then dropped. I'd like to give you reasons, if you'd let me. Her breath caught. Thatcher. I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. Just let me try. Let me show you that this arrangement doesn't have to be just business. What would it be instead? I don't know yet. His honesty was devastating. But I think it could be something real. If we're both brave enough. He left before she could answer, and Lorie stood in her yard, heart pounding, feeling like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, with no idea how far the drop was. The next morning, Frank Henderson arrived with a wagon full of lumber and a cheerful offer to help build the chicken coop. He brought his oldest son, and the three of them worked through the afternoon, measuring and sawing and hammering. By sunset, the coop stood solid and ready. "You'll need chickens now," Frank said, grinning. "I'll bring some hens over next week. Got more than we need anyway." "Mr. Henderson, I can't keep taking—" "You're not taking. You're accepting help, which is different." He wiped sawdust from his hands. "Besides, Martha really likes you. She doesn't warm up to people easy, but she sees something in you. Says you remind her of herself when she was younger." After they left, Lorie stood looking at the chicken coop, this tangible proof that she had neighbors now. Friends, maybe. People who helped without expecting anything in return. Because of Thatcher. Because he'd brought her into his world and made space for her there. That night she wrote him a letter. It took 5 attempts before she got the words right. "Thatcher, thank you for Sunday. For introducing me to people who see me as more than a poor farmer's daughter. For trying to give me reasons to smile. I don't know what we're becoming, but I'm willing to find out if you are. Lorie." She rode to the Boone ranch at dawn and left the letter with Dutch, her heart pounding the entire ride home. His reply came that afternoon. Just 3 words in his precise handwriting: "I am." Something shifted after that. Thatcher started coming by more often, always with practical reasons, checking the fence line, examining the spring, bringing news from town. But he'd stay for coffee. They'd talk on her porch as the sun set. Small conversations about nothing important, but each one felt like another brick removed from the walls they'd both built around themselves. One evening, he brought his guitar. "Didn't know you played," Lorie said. "Haven't in years." He ran his fingers over the strings, the sound slightly out of tune. "My mother taught me before she died. After she was gone, I couldn't bring myself to touch it." What changed? He looked at her, and in the twilight his eyes were soft. You made me remember what it feels like to have someone to play for." He played old songs she half remembered from childhood. His voice was rough but genuine, and something about it made her chest ache. When he finished, she found herself closer to him than she'd been before, their shoulders almost touching on the porch steps. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For this. For letting me see who you are underneath all the walls." His hand found hers in the growing dark. "I could say the same about you." They sat like that until stars filled the sky, hands linked, neither willing to move first and break whatever fragile thing was building between them. But peace never lasted long. The storm came on a Tuesday, rolling in fast and violent from the west. Lorie had just enough warning to secure Duchess in the barn before the sky opened. Rain hammered down, not the gentle soaking kind, but the brutal destructive kind that turned fields into rivers and washed away months of work. She watched from her window as water poured across her garden, drowning her vegetables, flooding the carefully tended rows. All that work, all those plans for market days and egg sales and building something stable, gone in 20 minutes. When the rain finally stopped, Lorie walked outside into devastation. Half her garden was underwater. The other half was beaten flat plants, broken and dying. The new chicken coop, thank God, stood firm on its raised foundation, but everything else was ruined. She stood in the mud, looking at the destruction, and something inside her broke. Not dramatically, not with screaming or tears, just a quiet, complete breaking. She sank to her knees in the flooded garden and pressed her hands to her face. She didn't hear the horse, didn't hear footsteps. But suddenly, Thatcher was there, kneeling beside her in the mud, his hands on her shoulders. "Lorie, look at me." She couldn't. If she looked at him, she'd fall apart completely. "Look at me." His voice was firm but gentle. "Please." She lifted her head. His face was inches from hers, wet with rain, eyes intense with concern. It's gone, she whispered. Everything I built. Again. No. His hands tightened on her shoulders. The garden can be replanted. The damage can be fixed. You're still here. That's what matters. I'm so tired, Thatcher. So tired of fighting just to survive. I know. He pulled her against his chest, and she felt his arms close around her solid and warm. I know you are, but you don't have to fight alone anymore. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You have me now. The words broke through her last defense. She clung to him and cried, really cried for the first time since her father died. For all the loss and struggle and desperate loneliness of the last year. And he held her through all of it, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring words she couldn't quite hear but felt in her bones. When the tears finally stopped, she pulled back embarrassed. I'm sorry. I got your shirt soaked. I don't care about the shirt. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away the last tears. Lorie, listen to me. You collapsed because you're exhausted and you've been carrying everything alone for too long. But that changes now. The contract didn't say, damn the contract. The vehemence in his voice shocked her. I'm not talking about the contract anymore. I'm talking about you and me and what's real between us. Her heart hammered. What is real between us? I don't know what to call it yet, but I know I think about you every morning when I wake up. I know I find excuses to ride past your property just to see you working in your garden. I know when Dutch told me about the storm I rode here fast enough to damn near kill my horse because I needed to make sure you were all right. He paused, his eyes searching hers. And I know that somewhere between signing that contract and tonight, this stopped being an arrangement and became something I can't imagine living without. Lorie's breath caught. Thatcher. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. He started to pull away, but she caught his hand. Wait. Her voice shook. I need you to know something too. He went, still waiting. I'm scared, she said. I'm terrified, actually, because I didn't sign that contract expecting to feel anything. I thought I'd keep my land, honor my father's memory, and stay safely alone. But then you started showing up, started seeing me, started making me remember what it feels like to matter to someone. She took a shaky breath. And somewhere between you fixing my roof and playing guitar on my porch, I started caring about you more than was safe. His eyes darkened. Lorie, I don't know what to call this either, but I know I don't want to keep pretending it's just business. I don't want separate houses and careful distance and all those safe boundaries we agreed to. She squeezed his hand. I want more. I'm just terrified of what happens if I admit that out loud. What are you terrified of? Losing you. The confession came out barely above a whisper. Losing this. I've lost everyone I've ever loved. My mother, my father, this land almost. I don't think I could survive losing you too. Thatcher's hands framed her face, his forehead pressing against hers. You won't lose me. I'm not going anywhere. You can't promise that. I can promise I'll fight like hell to stay. His voice was fierce. I can promise I'm done with half measures and careful walls. I can promise that if you're willing to take this risk with me, I'll spend every day proving you didn't make a mistake. Lorie's breath hitched. That sounds like more than a business arrangement. It is. It's me asking if you want this marriage to be real, all of it, not just on paper, but in every way that matters. Her heart felt too big for her chest. What about the contract? Burn it. He said it without hesitation. I don't want you bound by legal obligation. I want you bound by choice, by wanting to be here, with me. I do want that. The words came out steady, sure. I'm still terrified, but I want it. He kissed her, then soft and careful and full of promise. Lorie's hands fisted in his wet shirt, and she kissed him back with everything she'd been afraid to feel. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers again. Stay with me tonight, he said. At the ranch. Let me take care of you for once. No work, No fighting, just rest. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. She'd been taking care of herself for so long that accepting help felt like weakness, but she was so tired. And he was offering not just shelter, but something she'd been starving for someone to lean on. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes." They rode to the Boone ranch through the cooling evening, Duchess trailing behind his gelding. When they arrived, he led her inside and up the stairs to a room she'd never seen, a guest room with a real bed, clean linens, windows that caught the last light. "I'll bring you something to eat," he said. "And dry clothes." "Thatcher." She caught his hand before he could leave. "Thank you. For coming to find me. For not letting me break alone." His eyes were soft. "You'll never be alone again. I promise you that." After he left, Lorie sank onto the bed, her whole body trembling with exhaustion and relief, and something that felt dangerously like hope. She'd spent so long fighting to survive that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be cared for, to matter to someone. Thatcher returned with food and one of his shirts for her to sleep in. He sat with her while she ate, not talking, just being present. And when her eyes finally started to close, he pulled a blanket over her and whispered, "Sleep, Lorie. I'll be right downstairs if you need anything." She wanted to tell him to stay, wanted to ask him to lie down beside her so she wouldn't have to face the dark alone. But her courage had limits, and she'd already pushed them further tonight than she'd thought possible. So she just nodded and let sleep take her, feeling safer than she had in years. When she woke in the morning, early light streaming through the windows, she found a note on the bedside table. "Your garden can be fixed. We'll start replanting today. You're not alone in this. T." Lorie held the note to her chest and felt something crack open inside her. Not breaking this time, but opening. Making room for something new, something that looked a lot like love. She didn't know when it had happened. Didn't know the exact moment this practical arrangement had transformed into something real and terrifying and necessary. But it had. And now there was no going back. The question was whether she was brave enough to move forward. She was brave enough. Lorie dressed in her own clothes, still damp but serviceable, and went downstairs to find Thatcher already up, coffee brewing, bacon sizzling in a pan. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression made her chest tight. "Morning," he said. "Hungry. Starving." She sat at the table watching him move through the kitchen with easy confidence. "You cook?" "Had to learn after my mother died. Ranch hands can't survive on their own cooking alone." He set a plate in front of her, eggs, bacon, toast. Real food, not the scraps she'd been rationing. "Eat, then we'll go look at your garden." They rode back to her property in comfortable silence, morning light turning everything gold. When they reached her cabin, Lorie braced herself for the devastation she'd seen yesterday. It looked different in daylight. Still damaged, yes, but not destroyed. Some plants had survived. The structure of the garden beds remained intact. The chicken coop stood firm and dry. "It's not as bad as I thought," she said quietly. "No." Thatcher dismounted and walked through the flooded sections, assessing with a rancher's eye. "Most of this can be saved. We'll need to replant the tomatoes, but the root vegetables should recover. And the drainage is actually good. The water's already receding." She caught the word, held it. He turned to face her. "Yes, we. If you'll have my help." "Thatcher, you have a ranch to run. You can't spend days replanting my garden." "Our garden," he corrected. "And I can do whatever I damn well please with my time. I choose to spend it here. With you." The certainty in his voice undid her. She dismounted and walked to him, her boots squelching in the mud. "I don't deserve you." "That's not for you to decide." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I'm here because I want to be. Because last night, I realized something." "What?" "That I've been half alive for years. Going through motions, building an empire, never letting anyone close because it was safer that way. And then you rode onto my property, desperate and furious, and refusing to break, and something in me recognized something in you." He squeezed her hand. "We're both survivors, Lorie. Both people who learned to stand alone because we had to. But we don't have to anymore. Tears burned her eyes. I'm still scared. So am I. His honesty was devastating. I'm terrified I'll somehow fail you, that I won't be enough, that you'll wake up one day and realize you settled for safety instead of love. Is that what you think this is me settling? I don't know what else to call it. You married me because you had no other choice. That's how it started. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of him. But that's not why I'm standing here now. I'm here because when the storm came, you came too. Because you held me while I broke and didn't try to fix me, just let me feel what I needed to feel. Because you see me, really see me, and don't look away. She took a shaky breath. I didn't settle for safety, Thatcher. I found something I didn't know I was looking for. What's that? Home. The word came out soft but sure. You. This. Us. It's the first time since Papa died that I feel like I belong somewhere. He kissed her then, right there in the muddy garden, and it felt like a promise being made. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. Marry me again, he whispered. She blinked. We're already married. On paper, with a contract and witnesses and no feeling behind it. His hands cupped her face. I want to marry you for real, in a church with people we care about watching. I want to stand before God and everyone and choose you not because it's practical, but because I love you. The words stopped her heart. You love me? Yes. No hesitation. No doubt. I think I started falling the moment you refused to beg, even when you had every reason to. And I kept falling every time you showed me your strength, your heart, your stubborn refusal to give up. I love you, Lorie, and I want the whole world to know it. She was crying now happy tears that she didn't bother to hide. I love you too. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between contracts and coffee on the porch, you became everything. Is that a yes? That's a yes. She laughed through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you again. For real this time. He kissed her again longer this time, and when they finally broke apart, they were both grinning like fools. We should probably replant this garden, he said. Probably. But neither of them moved. They just stood there, hands linked, smiling at each other in the morning light, like two people who'd finally found what they'd been searching for all along. They spent the next week replanting side by side in the dirt. Dutch and some of the ranch hands came to help, and Frank Henderson showed up with seedlings and advice. Martha brought food and sat with Lorie on the porch talking about everything and nothing. He's different with you, Martha said one afternoon watching Thatcher work in the garden. Lighter, more himself than I've seen in years. He's different with me too, Lorie admitted. He makes me remember what it feels like to want more than just survival. That's what love does. Martha patted her hand. Reminds us we're meant to live, not just exist. The wedding was planned for a month later in the small church where Lorie's parents had married. Simple and genuine, just like they wanted. Lorie wore a new dress, white cotton with lace trim that Mrs. Chen made with obvious care. Thatcher wore his black suit and looked nervous in a way that made Lorie's heart squeeze. The Hendersons came. Dutch and the ranch hands. A handful of townspeople who'd proven themselves genuine friends. Not the social climbers or gossips, just people who cared. When Thatcher took her hands and spoke his vows, his voice was steady, but his eyes were bright with emotion. I, Thatcher James Boone, take you, Lorie Elizabeth Mayfield, to be my wife, not because of contracts or practicality or any reason except this. I love you. I choose you. Today and every day after. Through storms and droughts and whatever else comes. You are my home, and I promise to be yours. Lorie's voice shook when she spoke hers. I, Lorie Elizabeth Mayfield, take you, Thatcher James Boone, to be my husband. I choose you freely with my whole heart. You saw me when I was invisible. You stood beside me when I was alone. You taught me that survival and living are different things, and I want to spend the rest of my life living with you." When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Thatcher pulled her close and kissed her like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. Maybe he had been. Maybe they both had. The reception was held at the Boone Ranch, but this time Lorie walked through the door as more than Mrs. Boone in name. She walked in as Thatcher's wife, chosen and beloved, and the difference was everything. Later, when the guests had left and the stars filled the sky, Thatcher took her hand, ready to go home. Lorie looked at the ranch house, then at him. "Which home?" "Whichever one you want. The cabin, the ranch, both. They're yours now. All of it." She thought about her father's cabin, the place where her memories lived. And she thought about this house where she'd found Thatcher, where their future waited. "Both," she decided. "The cabin is where I came from, but here with you, this is where I'm going." He smiled, and it transformed his face. "Then let's go home, wife." That night, lying in bed beside him, Lorie thought about her mother's journal entry, about being seen and chosen and loved, about having that and it being enough. "What are you thinking about?" Thatcher asked, his arm warm around her. "My mother. She wrote about my father seeing her truly and choosing her anyway. I used to think I'd never have that I'd lost my chance when Papa died and the drought came. And now I know I didn't lose anything. I found it." She turned to face him in the darkness. "I found you, and you found me. Two people who learned to survive alone, figuring out how to live together. I like the sound of that." He kissed her forehead. "Living together." She fell asleep in his arms, feeling safer and more complete than she'd ever thought possible. The months that followed brought their own challenges. A late frost threatened the replanted garden, but they saved it together, working through the night with blankets and fire. A difficult calving season tested Thatcher's patience, and Lorie learned to help with the newborn calves getting covered in blood and birth fluids without complaint. The chickens Frank brought over turned out to be escape artists, and they spent an entire afternoon chasing hens through the yard, laughing until their sides ached. But through all of it, they had each other, and that made everything bearable. One evening, nearly 6 months after their second wedding, Lorie walked out to find Thatcher sitting on the porch with his guitar. He'd been playing more lately, old songs and new ones he made up as he went. "Play something for me," she asked, settling beside him. "Any requests? Something happy, something that sounds like us." He thought for a moment, then began to play. The melody was simple but sweet, and when he started singing, the words were about a woman who'd fought storms, and a man who'd forgotten how to hope, and how they'd found each other in the ruins and built something new. When he finished, Lorie was crying again, happy tears, the kind she was getting used to. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "You're beautiful." He set the guitar aside and pulled her close. "And I have something for you." He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, silver with a small turquoise stone, simple and perfect. "I know you wear my mother's ring on your right hand," he said. "But I wanted you to have something that was just ours. A ring I chose for you, not because of contracts or obligation, but because I wanted to give you something beautiful. Something that says you're mine and I'm yours, and that's the only thing that matters." Lorie held out her left hand, and he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Thank you," she said. "For this. For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible and choosing me when I had nothing to offer." "You had everything to offer." His voice was fierce. "Your strength, your heart, your stubborn refusal to break. That's not nothing, Lorie. That's everything." They sat together as the sun set, and Lorie thought about the journey that had brought them here. From desperate pleading to a contract marriage to something real and lasting. From survival to actually living. Later that night, lying in their bed at the ranch, she told him about finding her father's letter in the wooden box. about his words charging any man of honor to see that she wasn't dispossessed. "I think Papa would approve of you," she said. "I think he'd say, 'You're a man of honor.'" "I hope so." Thatcher's hand found hers in the darkness. "Because I take that charge seriously. You'll never be dispossessed again, Lorie. Not of your land, not of your home, and not of my heart. That's my promise to you." "And mine to you," she whispered. "You gave me reasons to smile. Let me spend the rest of my life giving you the same." Winter came, then spring, then summer again. The garden flourished. The cattle thrived. The ranch hands started calling her boss when Thatcher wasn't around, and she didn't correct them because it felt true. She was the boss of her own life now, making choices, freely building something that mattered. One afternoon, workings in the expanded vegetable plot behind the ranch house, Lorie felt Thatcher's arms slide around her waist from behind. "Taking a break?" she asked, leaning back against him. "Wanted to see my wife." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "Dutch told me the Millers are selling their property. 40 acres adjacent to your father's land." "Are you thinking of buying it?" "I'm thinking of you buying it, expanding your operation. You've already got people in town asking when you'll have more vegetables at market. And Martha says you're wasting your talent on just 40 acres. Lorie turned in his arms, studying his face. "You want me to run a farm?" "I want you to do whatever makes you happy. If that's farming, then yes. If it's something else, then that. You're not my wife to decorate the house, Lorie. You're my partner, my equal. What you want matters just as much as what I want." She kissed him deep and grateful and full of love. "What I want is this. You me building something together, and yes, maybe expanding the farm, maybe hiring help, maybe growing something that lasts. Then that's what we'll do." He smiled against her lips. Together. Years passed. The farm expanded. The ranch thrived. They hired workers, built more structures, turned Lorie's 40 acres into 100 and then more. The Mayfield Boone farm became known throughout the county for quality produce and fair prices. Lorie commanded the harvest crews with her sleeves rolled and boots caked in soil, and workers respected her because she'd earned it through sweat and determination. On their 5th anniversary, Thatcher came home to find her sitting on the porch with a small bundle in her arms. "What's that?" he asked, climbing the steps. She pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny red-faced baby boy. "Frank Henderson's daughter just had a baby, but she's sick and her husband died last winter. Martha asked if we could." Thatcher knelt beside her, looking at the baby with wonder. "You want to take him in?" "I want us to raise him. Give him the life we both wished we'd had. A home where he's safe and loved and chosen." Tears filled her eyes. "If you want that too." "I want that." His voice was rough with emotion. "God, yes, I want that." They named him Thomas after her father. And 3 years later, when they adopted a little girl they named Grace. After his mother, their family felt complete. One evening, when Thomas was 5 and Grace was 2, Lorie sat on the porch of her father's cabin, still standing, still maintained, still hers. Thatcher sat beside her, Grace sleeping against his shoulder, Thomas sprawling across Lorie's lap while she read from her mother's journal. "Whatever comes, drought, hardship, struggle, I will always have chosen this man and this life freely," she read aloud. Thomas looked up at her with serious eyes. "Did you choose Papa freely, Mama?" Lorie met Thatcher's gaze over the children's heads. "I chose him twice, actually. Once because I had to, and once because I wanted to more than anything in the world." "Which one was better?" Thomas asked. "The second time," Lorie said, "because that's when I understood the difference between surviving and living." Later, after the children were asleep and the stars filled the sky, Thatcher pulled Lorie close on the porch where this had all begun. "Do you remember what you said that first day?" he asked. "When you rode onto my property. Please don't take my home." The words still carried weight even years later. "And I said, then you must be my wife. He kissed her temple. Best decision I ever made. Even though it started as a contract, especially because it started as a contract. We had no illusions, no pretty lies, just two people being brutally honest about what we needed. And somehow that honesty became love. Lorie thought about the journey that had brought them here. From courthouse steps and desperate bargains to this, a life full of work and love and purpose. Children laughing in the yard where she'd once knelt in mud and despair. A partner who saw her truly and chose her daily. "I asked you to let me keep my home," she said softly, echoing the words that had changed everything. Thatcher smiled, pulling her closer. "And you gave me one instead." They sat together under the stars, two survivors who'd learned to thrive, two lonely souls who'd found each other in the ruins and built something beautiful. The land stretched out around them, healed, productive, full of life. A testament to what could grow when people chose to stand together instead of alone. Lorie Mayfield Boone had pleaded for her home and found so much more. She'd found love in a contract, hope in desperation, and family in the most unexpected place. And every morning when she woke beside Thatcher, every evening when she gathered her children close, she understood with perfect clarity what her mother had written all those years ago. This life, this love, this choice, it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.